Currents of change. The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. Henry David Thoreau. (1996). When the high season in Boracay ended, Mark and I planned to travel to Australia on a very small budget, with stops in Malaysia and Indonesia along the way. In Malaysia, we stayed by a serene lake where the lush greenery and tranquil water provided a welcome break from our hectic workdays. Despite the beautiful surroundings, I struggled with the local cuisine, often finding myself drawn to Chinese food instead. Malaysia's large Chinese population made this option easily available, and I welcomed the chance to avoid the peanut sauce that dominated many of the local dishes. "It's not that I miss Thailand," I explained to Mark one evening as we walked around the lake searching for a place to eat. Mark, who had been patient up until then, sighed in exasperation. "You're being ridiculous," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "Just find something else." "But there aren't any Chinese restaurants here," I protested, frustrated by the lack of familiar options. "All you ever want is Chinese food," he snapped, rolling his eyes. "We're not in China." "I've never been to China," I replied, trying to keep calm. "I just prefer it over the food here." The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface during our time in Malaysia began to bubble over as we continued our journey to Indonesia. The stifling heat and humidity of Sumatra only added to the stress. As we waited for the bus to Banda Aceh, I couldn't help but wrinkle my nose at the food choices available. "All they have is peanut sauce," I muttered under my breath. Mark, clearly out of patience, snapped again. "Stop complaining and eat something else." There wasn't anything else besides potato chips from a vendor at the bus station. I didn't press the matter further, sensing that our travel fatigue was starting to fray both our nerves and our relationship. Preoccupied by hunger, I barely noticed the ticket boy wearing a winter parka in the stifling tropical heat. It wasn't until later that night, as I shivered uncontrollably at 3 a.m, that I understood why. The freezing cold on the night bus caught me completely off guard. "I need to stop this bus," I blurted out, my teeth chattering as I struggled to stay warm. "What?" Mark mumbled, half asleep, blinking at me in confusion. "I'm freezing. I won't make it to the end of this ride," I insisted. Unable to bear it any longer, I stumbled down the aisle to the driver, using frantic gestures to convey my need to stop the bus. Despite the late hour, he obliged, pulling over so I could rummage through my bag stored under the bus. The ticket boy, still wrapped in his winter parka, watched impassively as I searched for something warm to put on. Unfortunately, my options were limited. I was traveling light in Southeast Asia, and I only managed to find a thin sweater, just enough to keep off the worst of the cold. By the time we arrived in Banda Aceh, my skin was tinged blue, and I felt utterly miserable. "I don't like it here," I muttered to Mark as we stepped off the bus. "The men are looking at me funny." I realized too late the importance of dressing modestly in this conservative region. As a 25-year-old foreign woman in a sleeveless shirt and shorts, I was attracting unwanted attention. Mark seemed either unaware or indifferent to the stares, leaving me feeling even more uncomfortable in this unfamiliar place. Once we arrived at our room, I felt a brief sense of security from the staring eyes outside, but the sweltering heat made staying indoors unbearable. The only relief came from a rattling ceiling fan that barely stirred the heavy air. It didn't take long before Mark grew restless to go out. "Come on, let's get out of this room and go see the town," he urged, rubbing his hands together. "No, I don't want to go out. I don't feel safe out there," I replied, my unease intensifying. "Ah," he huffed, his frustration surfacing almost immediately. "Come on already. Let's go." "That doesn't matter. I'm going without you," he barked, dismissing my distress. I didn't want to be left alone in the stifling room, yet the thought of facing the outside world was equally unappealing. Reluctantly, I got up from the bed. "All right," I said, forcing myself to follow him out into the street, where the watchful eyes of the men made me shrink inside. The following day, we boarded a bus to visit one of the last remaining habitats of the orangutans. As the bus rumbled along, I tried to engage in conversation to ease the lingering tension. "What are these animals? I can't understand the name," I said. I was curious but wary of his reaction. Mark's irritation flared instantly. "You don't know orang-utans?" Ah, he growled, his Swiss accent stressing the wrong syllables. Where have you lived all your life? Don't you understand anything? His harsh tone hit me like a slap. I fell silent, retreating into myself for the remainder of the bus ride. His words echoed in my mind, gnawing at my self-worth. I wondered when he had started speaking to me like this, and why I allowed it to happen. Even though Mark was my boyfriend and we had been together for months, I couldn't shake the feeling that with each biting remark, I was losing a little more of myself. I sulked the whole way to the conservation park, not fully understanding where we were headed until we walked through the gates and up to the platforms. My mood lifted when I saw them, semi-wild orangutans swinging up to the platform to eat the fruit left by the park rangers. It was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, yet it was sandwiched between some of the hardest and most emotionally uncomfortable times I'd ever experienced. After weeks of relentless travel through Malaysia and Indonesia, we arrived in Bali, a much-needed oasis. We chose a peaceful spot situated among lush gardens in the town of Ubud. Here the world seemed to slow down around us. The tension that had built up between Mark and me began to dissolve as we spent our days exploring the island on a motorbike, riding through terraced rice fields, marveling at volcanic landscapes, and stopping at hidden temples tucked away in the mountains. The island's vibrant parades, filled with colorful costumes, masks, and symbolic animals such as wild boars, tigers, snakes, dragons, and lions, offered a feast for the eyes and a distraction from our lingering friction. In the quiet moments, we enjoyed sipping tea in a Balinese village and listening to the distant sounds of their traditional instruments. I felt a sense of comfort. These tranquil settings allowed us to temporarily set aside the strains of our relationship and just exist in the moment. The time in Bali was short-lived, and we enjoyed only a brief respite before we continued to Australia. As we packed our bags and prepared to leave, I felt the typical mixture of anticipation and unease. The next leg of our trip awaited, but so did the unresolved tension between us. At the airport, as we waited to board our flight to Darwin, I noticed a group of men gathered around the aircraft. They were sitting on the outside of the plane, hammers in hand, working on the engine. What are they doing on the plane? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Mark joined me at the window, peering out to get a better look. They're working on the engine, he said, returning to his seat. With hammers. With hammers? I echoed, the absurdity of it making my stomach churn. We boarded the plane only to be instructed to disembark shortly after. We reboarded, this time noticing that ropes had been strung up to separate the cockpit from the cabin. As we settled into our seats, the thought of flying in a plane that had just been patched together made me uneasy. The plane lifted off the ground and I held my breath, gripping the armrest tightly. Thank goodness my mother can't see me now, I thought to myself. Fortunately, the flight was short, but every minute felt like an eternity. It wasn't until we touched down safely in Darwin, the northernmost point of Australia, that I was finally able to breathe normally.